The late 60s and early 70s in Northern California were haunted by a serial killer. To this day, he remains unidentified. He was proud of his work. He taunted the police, the local press, by sending letters including ciphers, and to this day, only one has ever been solved. This has led to his name, the Zodiac Killer. Welcome to episode 2 of Criminal Genius. Today we're looking at the Zodiac Killer. It's one I believe to be one of the most famous killers of all time. A man who took pride in his work, and a man who outsmarted everyone. The Zodiac Killer first struck on December the 20th, 1968. The location was Lake Herman Road, California. I encourage you now, look up this road. Get an idea of the scenery. Feel as though you were really there. This was the shooting of students Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. The couple were on their first date and had planned to see a Christmas concert close to Jensen's home. After they met with friends, the two of them drove out to Lake Herman Road, and at 10:15, Faraday parks her mother's car in what was known as Lover's Lane. Now this wasn't your typical Lover's Lane. In all honesty, it was just a dark road, but it was all they had. Let's fast forward to 11 p.m, 45 minutes later. Their bodies have been found by Stella Borges, a local. From there, no leads developed. Forensic data was worked out that there was another car that pulled into Lover's Lane, but that was all. It was believed that the killer had exited the car and walked towards them and ordered them out, before executing both of them, leaving a very bloody scene. This takes me on to attack number 2. Blue Rock Springs, July 4th, 1969, just 4 miles away from Lake Herman Road. This was the attack of Darlene Ferrin and Michael McGough. The couple were sat in a parked car. A second car comes, but turns away immediately. Before returning 10 minutes later, a man exits the car, goes up to Darlene and Michael, and shoots at both of them. Both were hit but alive, so the killer shoots twice more before driving off. Later that night, a man phones police reporting and claiming responsibility for the attack. He says, "I want to report a double murder. If you'll go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find the kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." As I mentioned before, this was a man who took pride in his work. He didn't want this crime to go undiscovered. He wanted to tell them that it was him. He wanted them to know that he was there and he was going to strike again if the authorities were unable to find him. Ferrin was later pronounced dead at the hospital, but in a miracle, McGough had somehow survived. He was shot in the face, neck and chest, but he lived through it. A friend revealed what he had to say after the attack. Dee turned the lights and motor off and had the radio playing. They were just there for a very short time, a few minutes, and 3 cars pulled into the parking lot where they were. They were apparently young kids, and they heard some laughing and carrying on, and a few firecrackers were set off. Then the 3 vehicles left within a short time. This was just a short space of time, a few minutes. Shortly after this, and about 5 minutes before the shooting occurred, a vehicle pulled into the lot, coming from the direction of Springs Road in Vallejo. The driver turned the lights off the car and pulled around to the left or east side of their car, approximately 6 or 8 feet away, and sat there for a minute. He asked Dee if she knew who it was, and she stated, "Oh, never mind." Here is the recollection of George Bryant, the son of a caretaker at Blue Rock Springs Park. He could hear laughing and a few firecrackers being shot off, but he couldn't see anybody. At approximately midnight, he heard what appeared to be a gunshot. This was much louder than any of the firecrackers. A short time later, he heard what appeared to be another gunshot. After another short pause, he heard rapid fire of what appeared to be more gunshots. He then heard a car taking off at super speed, and it burned rubber and was squealing its tyres as it sped along the road. He wasn't sure of its direction of travel. He didn't check, as it was the 4th of July, and thought it was just somebody celebrating. There were 9 shots confirmed to be fired. Here is another instance of the Zodiac taunting the authorities. In a letter he wrote, "The boy was originally sitting in the front seat when I began firing. When I fired the first shot at his head, he leaped backwards at the same time, thus spoiling my aim. He ended up on the back seat, and on the floor, in the back, thrashing out very violently with his legs. That's why I shot him in the knee. I did not leave the scene of the killing with squealing tyres and a racing engine, as described in the Vallejo paper. I drove away quite slowly, so as not to draw attention to my car." Notice there what he said at the end? He was annoyed. It had been written up, not like it actually happened. And as I said, he wanted perfection out of his crimes. He wanted them to be appreciated. And therefore, he told them how it really was. He saw his killing as a work of art. He wanted to be appreciated. We move on to the third attack. The Zodiac's next known attack occurred at Lake Berryessa, north of Napa, California. The man-made lake attracted visitors who enjoyed boating, fishing, picnicking, and other activities, and the recreation area was also home to the famous Berryessa Bowl, a music venue which featured many of the most popular bands and performers of the time. On the afternoon of September 27th, 1969, college students and friends Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard had settled along the shore of Lake Berryessa for a relaxing afternoon visit. According to Brian, he and Cecilia were lying on the ground along the shoreline when she noticed a man lingering in the shade of some trees nearby. Suddenly he appeared wearing a bizarre hooded costume that had a white cross circle stitched onto the front. The assailant held the frightened co-eds at gunpoint as he explained that he intended to rob them and make his escape. Brian and Cecilia were bound with clothesline, and just as they had hoped that the ordeal was about to end in more inconvenience, the hooded stranger set up upon them with a foot-long knife. When the savage attack was over, the stranger simply walked away and left his victims in agony. After the valiant battle for her life, Cecilia died several days later. Brian survived to describe the terrifying experience. As always, the Zodiac killer wanted everyone to know that it was him. That's why he used a black marker to draw a large crossed circle on the door of Brian's car. Below his symbol, the killer listed the dates of the two shootings and added the notation, September 27th, 69, 6:30, by knife. At 7:40 p.m., the Napa County Police Department received a call that had been placed from a telephone booth located a few blocks away. Officer David Slate listened as the caller said in a low, monotone voice, "I want to report a murder." "No, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of Park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Gear." Slate asked the man to provide his location, but the voice only grew more distant as the caller replied, "I'm the one who did it." Authorities produced sketches of the killer in a costume, as well as drawings of a man seen in the area on the day of the stabbing. The Zodiac killer, free to roam the streets and cause more and more terror for years to come. The Zodiac's last definite murder occurred on the night of October 11th, 1969. The victim was a cab driver named Paul Stein. The location of the crime was the rich, safe and exclusive San Francisco neighborhood called Presidio Heights. Presidio Heights hasn't changed very much in almost 35 years since the crime occurred. Meanwhile, Zodiac's motivation to kill in that particular neighborhood, as well as his behavior after the murder, remains a clear mystery. A passenger enters the cab driven by Paul Stein at the intersection of Mason and Geary Streets, 1 block west from Union Square, in San Francisco, requesting to be taken to Washington and Maple Streets in Presidio Heights. For reasons unknown, Stein drove 1 block past Maple to Cherry Street. The passenger then shot Stein once in the head with a 9mm, took Stein's wallet and car keys, and tore away a section of Stein's bloodstained shirt tail. The passenger was observed by 3 teenagers across the street at 9:55 p.m. who called the police while the crime was in progress. They observed a man wiping the cab down before walking away towards the Presidio. 1 block to the north, 2 blocks from the crime scene, Officer Don Fuchs, responding to the call, observed a white man walking along the sidewalk and stepping onto a stairway leading up to the front yard of one of the homes on the north side of the street. The encounter lasted only 5 to 10 seconds. Fuchs estimated the man to be 35 to 45 years old, while the teenagers who observed the killer in Stein's cab mentioned he was a 25 to 30-year-old, white male adult, at about 5'8 to 5'9". The radio dispatcher had alerted to be on the lookout for a black suspect, so they drove past him without stopping. The mix-up in descriptions remains unexplained. Well, I think I have an explanation. I'm sure you do too. The search ensued, but no suspects were found. The 3 teen witnesses worked with a police artist to prepare a composite sketch of Stein's killer. A few days later, this police artist returned, working with the witnesses to prepare a second composite sketch of the killer. This was unlike the Zodiac killer, a killing in broad daylight in a public area. Previously, he had only committed crimes in secluded areas where no one would be left to survive and see. This suggests to me that he wanted to remind people that he was around. He wanted to remind you that no one was safe, no matter where you were, in your own home, down at a bar, or even at work. No one was safe. Numerous other attacks are linked with the Zodiac killer. One can be found online. I won't go through all of them here. The ones I took you through are the ones confirmed, the ones we know of the Zodiac killer. But there are many others, many others, that he claims to have responsibility for. Who could this mystery man be? I have some suspects. Here we go. Arthur Leigh Allen. It all began on October 30th, 1966, when Arthur Leigh Allen became the prime suspect in the murder of Cherry Jo Bates. Allen is the number 1 suspect for being the Zodiac killer, and the only one to be served with search warrants. Police and investigators gathered a lot of evidence that appeared to prove that he was the killer. Allen's former friend, John Cheney, reported to the police that Allen had wanted to call himself Zodiac and kill couples at random. The police made Allen take handwriting tests, but his handwriting did not match what was on the Zodiac letters. Police found a Zodiac watch that Arthur wore and had a bloody knife that he claimed to kill chickens with. They also discovered a royal typewriter in Allen's home that was like the one used to type up the confession letter in the Bates murder. Later, Michael McGough, a victim who survived one of the Zodiac killer attacks, identified Allen as the killer in another murder. 1 month later, police found Allen dead on the floor of his home. But neither Vallejo nor the San Francisco police ruled him out as a suspect, even though his DNA, fingerprints, were not a match in their cases. Detectives in charge were 95% sure that Allen was the Zodiac killer, because so much circumstantial evidence pointed to him. I have to agree, there's an awful lot here that really makes me think that this man is the Zodiac killer, but I can't look away from the fact that the DNA didn't match, the fingerprints didn't match, the handwriting didn't match. This is clearly a bad man, a criminal. And maybe he did do one of the attacks, but I do not see it as a slight possibility that he is responsible for every single Zodiac killing. Richard Gajkowski. The next person suspected of being the Zodiac killer. There is a lot of reasonable evidence that points in this direction, including the words and phrases from the uncovered ciphers. Gajkowski worked for the Good Times newspaper, which focused on the anti-police, pro-violence counterculture in San Francisco. In January 1969, people started noticing the Good Times newspaper had published violent text and clues for the next Zodiac crimes. One day, the Zodiac killer decided to send 3 separate letters to 3 different newspapers, with each letter containing 1/3 of a code. 5 months later, the Good Times newspaper published their own 3-part code. They occasionally published articles with the headline, Zodiac Killer, out of nowhere, which was very strange. In 1969, Gajkowski published his articles under Gaik, or Gaik, to shorten his last name. That same year, the police received the 3rd-part cipher which clearly had the name Gaik on it. About 20 years passed before the police made him a Zodiac suspect. By that time, they couldn't get his fingerprints to compare to the Zodiac's, unless Gajkowski gave his permission, or the police got a court order. It gets even worse. Doctors diagnosed Gajkowski with a mental illness, and that's when the Zodiac didn't write for 3 years. The letters started to come again, just when Gajkowski went back to work. At a storefront theatre, Detective Ken Narlow kept an eye on Gajkowski, but Narlow couldn't get an arrest or a search warrant because there wasn't enough evidence. Once again, there are some extremely suspicious acts that Gajkowski took part in. But maybe the Zodiac really was a genius. Maybe he noticed that Gajkowski was being looked into, and when he went away for 3 years, the Zodiac went away as well. So this has to be one of either two things for me. Either Gajkowski is the serial killer, he is the Zodiac, or the Zodiac knew about Gajkowski and was clever enough to stop while he was away. We move on to Earl Van Best Jr. Out of all the suspects on this list, Earl Van Best Jr. has the closest facial features when compared to the sketch of the Zodiac killer. Gary L. Stewart, Best's biological son, raised the subject to police and claimed that his father was the famous murderer. Stewart wrote the book The Most Dangerous Animal of All about his theories. He hoped that it would bring closure to the victims' families. Stewart had gone on a hunt to find as much information as he could about his father's connection to the killer. He started looking at one of the cryptograms sent by the Zodiac killer to the San Francisco Examiner. Stewart found the words E.V., Best, and Jr. He claimed that this type of coincidence was impossible, and it made him want to dig even deeper. He also reported that his father's fingerprints matched those found at several crime scenes because both the Zodiac and his father had a diagonal scar. Stewart asked a handwriting expert to compare his father's signature on his marriage certificate to the handwriting found in the Zodiac letters. According to this expert, there was a match. Stewart is now waiting for DNA tests to see if there was another match between his father's DNA and what was found at the crime scenes. It's my belief that Earl Van Best Jr. is the most likely to ever be charged with any of the murders in the Zodiac killings. But again, it's impossible to rule out the other two. It really is a crazy one. My final pick of the suspects is a man named Lawrence Kane. Kane worked in the same Lake Tahoe hotel as Donna Lass, who disappeared in 1970 and may have been another Zodiac victim. He served in the Naval Reserves where he might have learned coding, and in a 1962 car accident left him with a brain injury that could have compromised his ability to control urges. He was arrested for peeping in 1961 and for prowling in 1968. A retired police detective investigating the case in the 1980s claimed that Kane's name was embedded in one of the Zodiac ciphers, and that Darlene's sister Linda had identified a photo of Kane as the man she said had bothered Darlene at a restaurant. A San Francisco police officer who probably saw the Zodiac moments after Stein's murder said Kane's photo was closer than any other likeness he had seen. Kathleen Johns, who escaped from a man believed to be the Zodiac in Modesto in 1970, also identified a photo of Kane as the abductor. Once again, Kane seems extremely suspicious. There's an awful lot of circumstantial evidence that points to him as a potential killer, but no more than the other 3 guys. As I said, these are my top 4, but there are even more people that are rumoured to potentially be the Zodiac killer or have involvement in one of his killings. What do I believe? Well, I can only really see one thing, and that's that the Zodiac killer was actually the Zodiac killers. There's too much pointing to too many different people to presume that this can just be one man. I believe that this started with one person, maybe it even formed a group, or maybe these are all just copycats. I don't know, and I'm not really sure we will ever know. This is a case that will probably never be solved, a bit like Jack the Ripper. I want to believe it will, and I have hope that it will, but at the end of the day, it's unlikely. I hope for justice for the victims, their families, and their friends. I really do. To end this episode with episode 2 of Criminal Genius, I'll talk about why I class Zodiac Killer as a criminal genius. Well, one reason more than the others. He's never been caught. No one knows for sure who he is, or who they are. If, and this is a big if, the Zodiac is one person, then he's a true criminal genius. The work that he's done to never been caught, or possibly never even been identified, would be truly sensational. If it was to turn out that the Zodiac killings were just loads of copycats, then of course I would no longer class them as criminal geniuses, Although they were never caught, so maybe one could consider them geniuses? It's a big word, and I've often wondered what I would really class as a genius. A genius is defined as an exceptional intellectual or creative power or other natural ability. The creative power of serial killers. Those that are never caught have creative power that no usual human being possesses. That's why they're never caught, because they think of the things that the average human mind is unable to. It truly is quite remarkable the more you look into it. The majority of crimes are solved, and the majority of these cases do not involve anyone who I'd class a genius. But these cases that are never solved, I believe that the people who have done these crimes are different. They're not like me or you. Whether they suffer from mental illness, probably. That doesn't mean they don't know what they're doing. Because trust me, most of these guys know exactly everything they're doing. Thank you for listening to episode 2 of Criminal Genius. Next week, I'll look at the famous case of the Unabomber, one of my favourite cases. There is no disputing this one. We have ourselves a real criminal genius. As always, feel free to like and subscribe. You'll be notified every single time I upload a new podcast, which will be weekly, every Monday or Tuesday, that's for sure.
Wow.